Hi there, everyone. Welcome to The Daily Gardener. I'm your host, Jennifer Ebling. It's June 10th. My neighbor up at our cabin has this amazing copse of lilacs. We've become good friends, and he invited me to take some cuttings of his lilac as a gesture of goodwill. He also gave me all of his jack-in-the-pulpit, but that's another story. Over time, lilacs have meant different things to different people. The Celtics thought the sweet scent of lilacs made them magical. During the Victorian age, widows wore lilacs because they were a symbol of old love. In Russia, in order to bless an infant with intelligence, they would place a little sprig of lilac over a baby's crib. Here's today's brevities. It's National Herbs and Spices Day. It's the season for growing fresh herbs. I just helped a friend put together a sweet little kitchen garden. Herbs are so wonderful to grow because as aromatics, they generally don't have any pest issues, and they offer tremendous texture and interest. On this day in 1793, the Botanical Garden opens in Paris. And it's the anniversary of the death of the Scottish botanist Robert Brown, who died on this day in 1858. Brown is best known for being the first to notice natural continuous movement of minute particles. It's known as the Brownian movement. Brown had experimented with all kinds of materials, including plants, and he saw the same jittery behavior. Brown was unable to explain why the particles moved, but 50 years later, Einstein was able to fully understand Brownian motion. Brown also named the nucleus in living cells. Nucleus in Latin means little nut. Brown published the remarkable survey on Australian flora, which he called the Prodromus. The Prodromus opened doors for Brown when it attracted the attention of Joseph Banks. They became great friends, so much so that when Banks died in 1820, he left his home, his collections, and his library to Brown, and he also endowed him with a large yearly allowance. And it was on this day in 1922 that Frances Ethel Gumm, a.k.a. Judy Garland, was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. When the famous professional wrestler George Raymond Wagner, known as Gorgeous George, retired, he quipped, "No more wrestling. I'm taking up gardening." When Garland heard this comment, she sent him a couple of pots of her hibiscus. In Unearthed Words, it's the anniversary of the death of Frances Theodora Parsons, who died on this day in 1952. She was an American naturalist and author, remembered most for her book on American wildflowers. Frances, or Fanny Smith, was born in 1861. When she was 23, Fanny married William Starr Dana, who was 16 years older than her and a commander in the U.S. Navy. After they married, she lost her first baby, and 5 years later, William died in a flu epidemic in Paris. Following the Victorian widow's custom, Fanny wore black and isolated herself. In 1893, Fanny published her popular book, How to Know the Wildflowers, under her husband's name. It sold out in 5 days, and it was a favorite of Theodore Roosevelt and Rudyard Kipling. 3 years later, in 1896, Fanny married a childhood friend, James Russell Parsons. Parsons was not well off, so Fanny wrote How to Know the Ferns, this time using her own name, Frances Theodora Parsons. A year after ferns, Fanny gave birth to their only daughter, Dorothea, who tragically died at 2.5 years old, 5 days before Thanksgiving in 1902. 3 years later, James was killed when his carriage collided with a trolley car. A widow once again, Fanny published this poem in 1911, When Laughter is Sadder Than Tears. Life is as sweet to the living as the flower is sweet to the bee, as the breath of the woods is sweet to the mariner far from shore. But singing and sweetness and laughter must vanish forevermore. As the petals fall from the flower, as the waters recede from the firth, when hopes no longer spring upward as larks in the morning soar, then laughter is sadder than tears, and grief is as barren as mirth. Today's book recommendation is Natural Selection, A Year in the Garden by Dan Pearson. Dan wrote, "A garden will have the power to transport and to lead you to a place that is magical. It is an oasis for creation, available to anyone with a little space and the compunction to get their hands dirty." In this book, Dan compiled 10 years of his columns in The Observer, sharing all the year-round pleasures of the garden. Today's garden chore is to order some box cutters for your garden toolkit. I just ordered this really nice 5-pack from Amazon, and I was reminded how useful a box cutter is when it comes to cutting sod along the edges of your garden or removing things like grass from the edges of your beds. Finally, here's something sweet to revive the little botanic spark in your heart. When I was researching Frances Parsons, I discovered that her childhood neighbor was John Burroughs. And Burroughs actually gave her the inspiration to write her wildflower book. He'd been featured in a magazine article, and he'd said, "One of these days, someone will give us a handbook of our flowers." And he even laid out how to organize the book. He said, "We shall have a list of all our flowers arranged according to color, with the place of growth and the time of blooming." Fanny was off to the races, and she wrote her wildflower book, which has been a model for all other books that have come after. And here are a few excerpts. Of the columbine, she wrote, "There is a daring loveliness which stamps it on the memories of even those who are not ordinarily minute observers. And of wildflowers, they touch the heartstrings in much the same way as the early notes of the robin." And then finally, "The pleasure of a walk in the woods and the fields is enhanced 100-fold by some little knowledge of the flowers which we meet at every turn." Thanks for listening to The Daily Gardener, and remember, for a happy, healthy life, garden every day. The Daily Gardener is produced weekdays in lovely Maple Grove, Minnesota. You can find complete show notes over at thedailygardener.org, and be sure to share the show with your garden friends. You can find The Daily Gardener on all your favorite social media, Instagram, Twitter, and Pinterest, and of course, Facebook. While you're over at Facebook, don't forget to join the Daily Gardener community. Just search for these 3 words, Daily Gardener Community. The group will pop right up, and then request to join. Finally, I want to thank my team at Podfly Productions, where my fabulous editor is Eric Begay. Have a great day in the garden, and we'll see you tomorrow.